Good morning. Welcome to the Global Policy Forum, STI Catalyzing Regional Development. We're going to have a very, very interesting panel today, so let's call our guests, starting by Mr. Sayed Aka, Vice President of the Islamic Development Bank, please. Sergey Guriev, the Chief Economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Mr. Alexander Stubb, Vice President for the European Investment Bank. Sir Danny Alexander, Vice President for the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, and Alexander Miera de Rosa, Vice President for the Inter-American Development Bank. Welcome, everyone. We have a very, very interesting lineup here today, having all these development banks with us to discuss science, technology, and innovation moving forward, where we want to ask a lot of more questions when we have them. Opportunities, what to do moving forward. So let's start with Mr. Sayed. If we are looking at incorporating STI in fulfilling your goals for 2030, how do we read that?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, science and technology and innovation is nothing new. It has been with us since our creation. It's just, I think now we are getting how we can establish mechanisms and platforms and procedures to do our business more efficiently, and also to have science and technology work for development. Of course, we don't have to convince you all that science and technology has really advanced human progress and human development. We deal with it every day, so that is behind us. And what we have done as multilateral institutions, as development institutions, for science technology. But now the question is what we are going to do to address human needs, the needs of societies and communities, of course embodied in the Global Agenda 2030, along with other development goals of the climate agreement and others. So that is, I think, the challenge in front of us. And we believe that we have to really have a mindset shift, a shift in doing things in a way that science and technology really facilitates development for the poor. Also a shift from a top-down only sort of approach that the solutions come from the top all the time. We know and see all the gadgets in our hands and all the online sites and websites that have transformed our life, to do both, to do top-down and bottom-up, to bring ideas, innovations from the communities, from the students, from the youth, from young people, and from poor communities where there's a lot of ideas, but they really don't know how to develop them, how to research, how to further do it in a way that is applied for their needs. For example, purifying water in a remote village. Maybe people have excellent ideas, but they don't have the finances and the capacities. And also another shift is from shifting only on finance focus, because when you see the banks here, you believe that, okay, money is everything. Of course, money is important. But now I think we believe in addition to finance, there is know-how, knowledge, capabilities. Those are the type of assets we really have to utilize for achieving our goals and objectives. Furthermore, a shift from doing things in a way that is, this is your problem and we solve it for you, to engage, to partner with the private sector, with policymakers, with young people, with the communities themselves, to come up with the combined solutions. And maybe later on we can go on to what the Islamic Development Bank is doing towards that, but just to break the ice, this is why we are here. Again, as I said, we are not bringing something tangible new, but we are going to bring something, shifts in these approaches and doing things differently.
You mentioned a lot working with in poor countries and poor areas. Mr. Guriev, EBRD, we were talking earlier that you work mainly in middle-income areas. How would we look at STIs in that direction? What kind of innovation would you be interested in?
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, since we work mostly in middle-income countries, we do see that science, technology, innovation is actually the only way forward, because without innovation, you cannot really promote growth and development. In poorer countries, you can hope for low wage comparative advantage. In middle-income countries, you have to invest in productivity, you have to invest in advanced education, you have to build markets with high value-added sectors. And there you need different set of institutions. For example, financial system cannot only be bank-based. You need to develop equity markets, you need to develop venture capital. That's what we do, and in that sense, we have to change as well, being a development bank. We don't only do development, we also invest in equity directly, but also through our private sector partners, private equity funds, where we are partners in pretty much every good private equity fund in the region, about more than 100 of those. Another issue, which I think is very important for innovation, is, and this is where we do have large countries where we invest, but most of our countries are actually quite small. It's important to remember that innovation is a returns to scale business. So if you want innovation, you want to make sure that you have access to bigger markets. So if you innovate, you need to be part of the global economy. Otherwise, you don't achieve scale, you don't achieve productivity, and returns to innovation are actually quite small. Another thing I would say is, whenever we talk about Agenda 2030, we quickly start talking trillions. And even with all combined firepower on this stage, our institutions together cannot really pay for this. And even EIB doesn't have the trillions to solve the challenges of Agenda 2030. So we need to involve private sector. And this is where the key is to create incentives for private sector to invest in innovation and R&D. People think about various achievements in R&D and think that governments play a key role. But actually today, a lot of innovation and a lot of research is happening in the private sector. And we need to create incentives for this. And I think one important things which we see, and we are actually almost half of our investment is in green projects. We see how together with the private sector, we already can achieve green economy transition. People think about climate change as something that governments have to lead, but actually governments just don't have enough money. So the key is now to create incentives for green innovation by private sector. And this is going to be the main source of innovation, the main challenge to the private sector, how to move away from assets which will be stranded in 20 years, and how to invest in technology which is energy efficient and climate friendly. And we already see that. So our research shows that even today, if you look at stock market valuations of companies with greener business models, already we see stock market valuing green business. Already we see that there is a premium in terms of price-earnings ratios for green companies. They are not as profitable today, but stock markets already believe that they will be more profitable tomorrow. And in that sense, countries that manage to convince the markets that all business models will not be sustainable in 15 or 20 years, these countries already create incentives for private sector to innovate in a green technology. So let me stop here. I think I would rather be quite optimistic on this.
Mr. Tabb, do you agree that you cannot afford to keep financing and you need to look for alternatives within the private sector in order to look at innovation in science and technology?
Yeah, I actually agree with everything that was just said, and perhaps two observations on that. The first one is, I mean, a lot of people don't always know the job of international financial institutions. But basically our aim is to try to crowd in investment. And we quite often believe that the age of subsidies and grants and direct financing is not necessarily over, but that'll never meet the aims of the SDGs. You're talking about trillions. I think the figure that we often hear is that in order to fulfill the SDGs, there's a financing gap about 2.3 trillion. I have no idea where that figure has come from. And even if all of us were to get involved and leverage as much financing as possible, we wouldn't be able to meet them. But I think what our argument is that we need to at least try, because what we do is we provide a loan directly, or we provide a guarantee or some kind of another financial instrument. And once we go in there, suddenly a lot of private sector investors and banks start coming in. And this is the way we provide value added. The second observation I have is on the combination of climate and technology. I mean, obviously that's the future, and I think for all of us who are dealing with the subject matters, it's a non-brainer. The way in which technology today empowers different regions of the world, the way in which climate changes and environmental issues are going to dominate the future of industry is tremendous. And here, my final point, and I'll stop here. It's interesting to look at maps of countries that have been the biggest causes of global warming and climate change because of dirty industry over the years, and the ones who suffer most from climate change. Unfortunately, the ratio is inversed. So basically the ones who have been the contaminators are potentially benefiting more from climate change than vice versa, and this is something that I think we need to rectify, part of the SDGs.
Sir Danny, do you think that the MDBs could have a role in rectifying that and changing that, and how?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it links very much to the topic of this meeting, because so for the AIB, we're a relatively new institution, been going for 2 years, based in Beijing. We have a specific focus on infrastructure. So other of the institutions here, their remits are broader. They cover many different areas of activity. We focus solely on infrastructure. And if you look at the priorities for infrastructure investment, one of the most important is sustainable infrastructure. Infrastructure that helps countries to meet the challenge of climate change. That could be renewable energy, or helping countries with the energy transitions they've mapped out under the Paris Agreement. It could be sustainable cities. It could be infrastructure that improves the efficiency of the trading connections they have with their neighbors. And all of those are areas where there's a huge amount of technological innovation, and where I think our institutions have a responsibility to try and identify which are the technologies that are going to be most effective in 10 or 20, 30 years' time, particularly in those countries that are at an earlier stage of development, because in a way they have the opportunity to leapfrog straight to the best of the new technology without passing through some of the technologies that the older, let's say in the energy sector technologies, which are the most polluting, but to go straight to the clean technology, the more efficient cities, and those things. So we certainly see for the AIB that supporting investments in those sectors.
And the new technologies.
In the new technologies that support renewable energy, that support sustainable cities, is going to be a crucial part of ensuring that the world meets that climate change challenge.
Mr. De Rosa, do you think the banks or the development banks are equipped to adopt and catalyze the STIs?
Well, first, good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, maybe if I can make a quick statement on Latin America, because it's also the region where we operate. It's also a middle income region, right? And facing the risks, if you want, of the so-called middle income trap, where you have to break you have to increase productivity, as Sergey reminded us. And what we are seeing in governments in the region, and also the private sector, is that they see STI as their platform for that leapfrogging that Danny mentioned before. So now, I was just checking the numbers. 3/4 of all the countries in Latin America now has a digital agenda for their governments, right? In other words, a strategy, a plan on how to improve their use of technology on the private sector and in government services. However, the challenge that we see is how to link those strategies with actual increase in productivity at sector level and in cross-cutting, right, across all sectors. And I think that MDBs and RDBs specifically have done, I think, and I'm certainly suspicious to state that, but I will do anyway, that we have done a good job in incrementing climate finance, for instance. We have embraced the climate agenda as a mandate. We have increased our lending and mobilization of resources in climate financing. How? By actually creating incentives for in every single operations that we work in. We included mitigation and adaptation components. So we did not enter to work specific sectors by sector. We just kept doing what we did. In infrastructure, for instance, we changed our agenda towards sustainable infrastructure. We start discussing fiscal policies, including climate change as an element. We start discussing regulatory changes in the electricity sector, for instance, having climate change in mind. So I think that our role now is to be again a platform of resources, but as Alexander said, it will be not enough. Not even all of these institutions combined will be able to mobilize all of those resources, but a platform to private investors, but above all, a platform of solutions at the operational level, at the ground level, right? So your question, whether we are equipped for that, I would say that we do have the instruments, the financial instruments, if you want, for that. But quite honestly, being for quite some time in this business, I would say that we can learn about, before we start preaching innovation, we can also innovate ourselves, our own business model. I think that there's a lot to learn, for instance, from the philanthropic industry, where they have been utilizing crowdsourcing in designing solutions. We are still very much centralized in the way we design solutions. Right?
How would that get into, I mean, if anyone would like to comment.
Yes, sure. I think let me build on that. I think this is quite important to say that we have to learn and innovate ourselves and crowd in ideas and crowd in solutions, to move from a finance solution to idea solutions. I think this is quite critical. And this is why we at IDB are, for example, if you say you're equipped today, no, we are not. But we are moving with a vision that we are writing our own science and technology and innovation strategy. We are about to launch a platform, and the platform exactly aims to bring ideas from industry, from business, from youth innovators, from poor communities to the surface, and then link it with finance, link it with research and development.
Link it in a matching process. How would you link it to finance?
Well, there are two instruments. One is a fund that we have launched already, $500 million initial capital. So the fund will help in developing ideas, will help build capacity, regulatory capacities, capacity and capabilities of institutions. And also when you get these ideas will be then linked with because we know there are 2.5 trillion gap financing SDGs, but there are more than, I believe, $17 trillion sitting cash everywhere, not invested. They are waiting for investment. So it's a huge amount of cash. So and then there are a huge amount of ideas in the ground, either with the universities, with young people, with poor communities. So we want to link these ideas with the cash to be financed and developed and work for development.
Just linked to this issue, I think there's a wonderful book written by Erik Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee. It's about artificial intelligence and robotics and Internet of Things and so on and so forth. And it has a very simple name. It's machine, platform, crowd. And it's interesting in what you said and what you said, you mentioned two of those issues, platform and crowd. And one of the problems that we have in the international financial institutions is that we haven't really adapted, I think, well enough to the modern world in terms of using financial technology. And now I'm not talking about Apple Pay or crowd financing and these kinds of things. But if and when we have a lot of firepower to try to fill the investment gap of 2.3 trillion euros for the SDGs, Why don't we have, number one, a proper platform to do that? And why don't we use more crowds? Because I think the times of doing business just from your own platform and just individually is over. And I think a lot of us need to be quite radical in our thinking. Obviously, traditional banks are starting to move in that direction, but I think IFIs are not doing that.
So what would you suggest moving forward? What would be a good action plan?
Two things. Number one is that each institution needs to look at financial technology from a new perspective. We need to start understanding algorithms. We need to start understanding market analysis from a new perspective. We need to start looking at different types of instruments. Basically become modern, huh? Because
Okay.
we are a little bit. And the second thing is, okay, once we've done that, let's get together and look. Because, I mean, a lot of people are questioning multilateralism nowadays, right?
Okay.
And I think that we, the multi-financial institutions, we have a lot to give. So we should get together and see what kind of platforms we can create together.
But it's also, I agree with that very much, but it's also, what multilaterals do is not just about giving money for projects. It's also about helping to develop projects that have high standards, sharing those high standards, sharing knowledge. And those are areas which are ripe for technology to improve them. So if you think about the old way of monitoring projects, you send hundreds of people into the field to go and check up on each and every aspect of it. And of course, the human dimension will continue to be very important in that. But if I think of one project that we're involved in India, a rural roads project, the monitoring is being done largely by technology, with video cameras and so on, so you can actually watch what's going on over the internet. So you can see, is the road being built? Has this stretch been completed today as it was supposed to be? Exactly. Or is it still underway? And the same is true with knowledge sharing. And I think what that leads you to is to say the business model of international financial institutions can become leaner, can become more efficient using technology, which then means that more of the taxpayers' money, which in the end is what we draw our investments from, can be devoted to investing in the projects and the initiatives, and less into the kind of bureaucracy of the institutions.
And if I can chip in on that, and I completely agree with Danny, it's not, technology will not help us only to perform and execute our projects better. But I think we have to look at a way where innovation and technology can help us to design our projects way better. We are building our business model is that we lend and use our earnings to technical cooperation, right? But we think about technical cooperation of resources used by our experts and hired experts to design solutions. And I think that we have to shift that paradigm and utilize those resources to look solutions just like the innovation, the successful innovation ecosystems work. They establish X prizes, for instance. Bring me the best solution wherever and however is designed, right? And you remunerate for that. And I think that we have to incentivize governments to think this way as well. That will imply paradigm changes for them. How do they procure services, right? That's now a hard issue for federal and local governments to procure innovation, because they have to bid for the best price, right? Not necessarily for the best solution.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges here is, of course, all solutions will eventually be context-dependent and country-specific. And this is where multilateral institutions, and especially regional banks who are on the ground, can actually facilitate this knowledge transfer. And sometimes it's not indeed knowledge from Washington coming to Egypt. In our case, we talked to Jordanian government who want to build e-government. They can learn from Estonia, not from DC. In DC, there are still miles to go in terms of digital government. Also, some challenges are region-specific in the sense that the developed world doesn't know how to create digital identities for refugees who lack documentation. So you need to use new technology like blockchain, and this is again,
or maybe invest in data collection, for example, data management.
So exactly. And basically, it's not something that you can simply borrow from the West. You can actually develop it bottom up and support this development. And in that sense, I think there are many things we can do together with the countries of operations, not just the Western shareholders who sometimes are a bit behind, or sometimes don't have the same challenges that we need to address in our countries of operations.
And I guess you can look at the UAE as a great example. I mean, the Minister of Artificial Intelligence talk about a new cryptocurrency. I mean, it's cutting-edge stuff, and I think in some cases the West will have to try to catch up. On the data collection thing, can I just make a point which I think, again, international institutions come into play? I think we are approaching a time when we need a new moral/ethical code for any technological development. By that I don't mean that we need to protect and constrain and so on and so forth. But I do think that with issues such as data collection, we will be faced with enormous ethical questions when, you know, Facebook, Google, Alibaba, Tencent, you name it, know much more about us than we know ourselves. And how you then, you know, deal with that data as well. And I think we need some kind of an in-between. I'm not saying that international financial institutions need to do it because these are political policy decisions, but I think we can be there to help to finance this type of stuff, because I do think constitutions were originally created to protect the individual from the state, and now we don't necessarily need protection from the state. We need protection from multinational
I think
corporates.
development in science and technology innovation also force us as institutions to change our business model and our role. You know,
Yes.
our role not purely perceived or was as financiers and project managers, project developers, but as catalysts. You know, bringing private sector, bringing innovation, bringing with the policymakers. You know, to find solutions because one sort of partner alone cannot do it, whether it's private sector or whether it's government or us. So I think that is key, that for this new way moving towards innovation in science and technology, to build these partnerships and bridges of knowledge, you know, all these big data, you know, how they can help with policy, with certain targeting, with planning, but also, especially in our region, in most of our countries, you know, UAE and others, are a few exceptions, you need also strong governance system, strong regulatory and enabling environment. So all those, I think, science and technology can play a very important role to do that.
Having all of you here on the stage, we have from the Americas, we have Asia, we have Europe, and we have the Islamic, the ISDB. Having all of you here, we need to talk about solutions. You all talk about the need to do something and incorporate science and technology, the need to change the way that we are looking at things and maybe create new platforms. Having you all here, we have to take this opportunity and ask you for solutions. I mean, what would be something, would there be maybe a hope for collaboration in the future? Would there be some sort, maybe a framework that someone could start with moving on for development banks to change their way of thinking? Could anyone, you don't like the question?
I mean, I think there's already a lot of discussion and collaboration between multilateral development banks of precisely that question, which is how, and it goes back to what Alexander was saying, how do these institutions adapt, not just to science and technology, but also to the fact that we live in a world where you know, multilateral cooperation, even globalization, is under pressure in certain circumstances. I think one area it already manifests itself is in the degree of cooperation that exists between these institutions. So to take the IIB as an example, we co-finance many of our projects with other multilateral development banks. That helps to share risks, it helps to share knowledge, it helps to share expertise, it helps to ensure that the countries themselves are benefiting from more than one perspective in the projects that they're developing. But I think one area where probably we need to continue to think is in terms of how we assess the risks of projects, because you know, if we're going to embrace the most innovative technology, but by definition that's not always been tried and tested and used in many projects, and so then it would be easy to say, no, let's leave that for a while until it's been deployed in many places. And of course there's a balance to be struck because we're investing taxpayers' money, we have to be very careful with it. But if you're trying to support countries to develop an agenda for 2030, perhaps one needs to find a way to be a little bit less risk averse sometimes and a bit more embracing of the best new ideas.
Well, I always agree with Alexander. Just when, I guess this is the moment when you pitch your own institution, the European Investment Bank, because you ask what we're going to do and what we do. We're actually the biggest multilateral bank in the world, and probably the best kept secret in the world and in Europe as well. Basically, we have assets of 600 billion euros, capital 250 billion, and we provide financial instruments, loans, guarantees for about 80 billion per year. What is our solution? Nowadays, we do 90% of the business that we do inside the EU. It's SMEs, innovation, infrastructure, and climate, right? Now, what do we want to do? We want to start focusing a bit more on the 10% that we do outside the EU to try to meet the social, the SDGs, to try to give more firepower to development in general. Now, what we are thinking about and what we're doing is to create basically a subsidiary inside our own bank, whether it'll be called the European Development Bank, whatnot, but just to try to rationalize our instruments and make it a bit smarter. We work a lot with the EBRD because they're excellent on the ground. They do a lot of private stuff. We are in about 160 countries, but we do a lot of public stuff when we go out. So we're going to try to focus and rationalize our own work and make it a bit smarter and a little bit more efficient than what it used to be. So that's basically what we do at the EIB.
So you just mentioned the SDGs, and yesterday the United Arab Emirates launched the Global Council for Sustainable Development Goals. Would this be something that you would be interested in maybe in investing in? Also, the question is to everyone.
Well, I mean, it's a very welcome idea. I mean, welcome initiative. It's no more an idea. It's a reality. Of course, we will be, as our part, really supportive, to this council, and will contribute to it. Also, I already mentioned our fund, and you mentioned asked specifically what we are going to do in the platform, and we are more than willing to work with all of us, and we already have a lot of cooperation that you may or may not know, but we want to further strengthen that. And maybe we can have a kind of using technology, have a kind of exchange, maybe every 2 months or every 3 months among ourselves, and see, what are some of our best practices and how we can share and work together. So hopefully maybe for the next year we will come report back, that what we achieved.
Maybe we can come up out something interesting out of this, Mr. De Rosa.
Yes, of course, and I think that we can, and we have already many fora where we meet and discuss, start to exchange our networks of knowledge and innovation, because each one of us are tapping on innovation ecosystems in their regions, right? In our case, in Brazil, in Argentina, we have an association with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and I'm sure that we have the same experiences here that we can share. But going back to your first question on specific solutions, we are seeing, and mentioning what one of our colleagues raised, is the importance of what so-called South-South cooperation that we are seeing, which not necessarily obey the geographic north and south. But we have seen, for instance, we are supporting Uruguay. Uruguay is a small country, 3 million people in the southern part of the region, that decided to, by 2020, become 100%, the government of Uruguay decided to become 100% digital by 2020. And where did they sought the experience? Where we helped them to seek the solution? Estonia, that was mentioned here before. So I think that we have also the responsibility to build those bridges between different regions as regional development banks for exchange of experience. And also, following the comments of Alexander on the AIB, what we decide to do as an institution is to use one of our windows, called Multilateral Investment Fund. This fund was endowed last year with $300 million from the region and from non-regional members, to use that fund as our innovation lab. In other words, those are grants that are used exclusively to innovation on development. Innovations that we can use, that we can learn, that we can risk, that we can lose the resources if it is the case, but learn from the success and the failure, and then scale up at the larger proportions of the entire bank. So this is the kind of solution that we are trying to.
And let me mention another solution. First and foremost, indeed, cooperation is going on, and G20 is actually reviewing all multilateral development institutions as we speak, and there'll be a report coming up, intermediate report in April, and final report in October. But let me mention a solution as also an example of cooperation between
That will be our last
multilateral,
remark as well, yes.
yeah, multilateral banks. We now are co-investing with International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, in a global green bond fund, which is going to be managed by Amundi, and it's opening up green finance to private sector and bringing up a couple of billions at this stage to the market of green bonds. And I think this is where a lot of financial innovation is going to happen. Financial instruments investing in climate finance and actually defining standards, defining different instruments. And this is where RDBs do have an opportunity, because we can indeed provide not just money, but also knowledge, how to measure things, how to drive things, and what to incentivize.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in order for us to finance ourselves, right, we need money from the markets. And one of the things that the EIB did, the first one, was to have a green bond. And we're seeing in a lot of investors this pattern, institutional or other, that they want to invest in those. And actually the father of the green bond is Bertrand de Mazières, sitting over there in the corner. So we've been in that business for a long time, and I think it's something that
So now we're getting somewhere. We have to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Just one line, that this region was the center of innovation for centuries, and it's reviving now, and we will help in revival. Dubai is an excellent example, GCC, I think.
And the whole world is becoming one now, so it's easy to communicate, hopefully, for the future. Thank you very, very much. It was really interesting having all these amazing or high-profile development banks on stage. We'd like to thank you now, and we'd like to listen to the closing remarks of Dr. Bandar Hajjar, the president of the Islamic Development Bank. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, at the outset, I would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates and the ruler of Dubai, and to the United Arab Emirates for hosting this summit as an international platform that brings together governments, leaders, think tanks, policy makers, as well as private sector to discuss means and ways to develop the future government based on the latest development and future trends. Islamic Development Bank is a multilateral institution that has been serving member countries for more than 4 decades. Since I assumed my office as president of the bank about a year ago, I formulated a new vision where STI plays a central role in promoting economic and social development, and to put this new vision into action. The President's 5-year program has been developed where the bank pays special attention to encouraging innovation among its member countries for their vital role in addressing development challenges and contributing to achievement of Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. As a result, as part of a new organizational structure, we have established a special department for STI, and we have developed a new roadmap includes a number of initiatives, including partnership with the public and private sector to promote the transfer of knowledge and innovation between institutions and countries. Such initiatives include the establishment of Science, Technology and Innovation Fund under the name of Transform, with the approval of initial capital of $500 million, aiming to promote scientific innovation in member countries and support scientific application in development projects in key sectors such as health, agriculture, infrastructure, education, to achieve a comprehensive and sustainable economic development impact. The creation of online platform under the name of Engage for the inventors around the world, in which the bank seeks innovative solutions for developing countries to contribute to 5 sustainable development goals, including clean water, affordable clean energy, good health and well-being, quality education, and hunger reduction. The platform also provides an opportunity to connect inventors with public and private sector donors to stimulate innovation and exchange of knowledge among member countries. The establishment of an intellectual property office to promote its effectiveness and support its member countries to develop sound science, technology, and innovation policy. Developing an STI policy framework that will help the bank chart its own STI policy as well as act as a leader to provide capacity building for member countries to develop their own national STI policy. The transformation of the IDP scholarship program to empower promoting talent in member countries and Muslim communities in non-member countries with the right education in fields related to sustainability science to contribute to the development of their communities and pass on knowledge for generations to come. Training women to become engineers, to become active developers in their local communities. Providing the first of its kind program for refugees, scientists, and the thousands of researchers and advanced students in science-related disciplines who have migrated from areas of conflict to other countries. These scientists and students represent the loss of incredible amount of expertise and potential value. They can provide useful skill and insight in their new countries, and someday they will be needed to return home to help to rebuild. Providing capacity development opportunity for scientists and decision makers to have constructive dialogue with the hurdle and obstacle that prevent innovation, scientific and technological solution to flourish in our member and contribute to reverse brain drain. The Islamic countries are currently facing many developmental challenges in many areas such as energy, climate change, food security, information and communication technology, education, access to water and health services, resulting in a weak investment in innovation and fewer patent applications compared to developed countries. It is well known that no single development organization can address all challenges in member countries on its own. On the other hand, there is no country which has no wealth of knowledge and expertise in certain areas that may be useful to other one, which calls for centralized local, regional, and international effort to develop a new partnership and to build innovative capacity to promote STI in member countries. The organization, such as Summit, provides an appropriate opportunity to move us forward with optimism, and as well as the beginning of the new era of increased wise, comprehensive, and balanced investment in science, technology, and innovation. Before I conclude, we in IDB look at the science and technology and innovation as a tool of creating wealth in addition to addressing the challenges facing our member countries. Because when we succeed in creating wealth, we will be able to solve all the challenges facing our member countries, because creating wealth will move the economic growth up, and this will be, this is the force which is responsible for solving and addressing all these problems. Let me conclude by thanking all of you and wishing all success to the summit of Agenda. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.